Well, I like that you mentioned because they're both important, and that's true. But you can be as productive as anybody, but if you're not working on the right things, or if you're not delivering value, then it's not. Is it really productivity? So I often refer to two lines from songs. One was from an Alanis Morissette song called "Mary
Ugh.
Jane," where she said, "It's full speed, baby, in the wrong direction." And I always thought that was a great line. And then John Lennon had a line that said, "How can I go forward when I don't know which way I'm facing?" And I think those two kind of speak to it.
Today we have Jerry Manis on the pod, and I am really excited about this conversation. One, because Jerry has such a rich history in the project portfolio management space, and he legitimately wrote a book on resource management and capacity planning. So if that doesn't make him an expert, I really don't know what does. One of the things that we talk about today is the terminology that organizations use to describe project management, portfolio management, resource forecasting, allocation, workforce planning, all of these different things. The terms are different from organization to organization, but the concepts are the same. And then he really kind of dove into how classic PMOs are kind of like the project police or methodology police. And I do think that there's, a comical aspect to that. It is a little bit funny. But I also think it's true where sometimes organizations are just so tied to their terms that they're letting that block, what they're trying to do, how resource planning in general is going to help them become more strategic, how it's going to help their people be more productive and therefore less burnt out and therefore more involved, how they can make sure that the projects that they are prioritizing are going to get done, how everything is aligned throughout the organization. And the one thing I wish we could all really focus on is it's not about the terms, it's about what we are trying to achieve. Jerry and I end the conversation on storytelling and how important storytelling is for leaders and for change throughout the organization, for people to understand, let's just say adopting resource management is asking people to do one more thing and one more complex thing. 1000%. No one wants to do one more thing, especially if it's going to be a little bit difficult. But when you're storytelling and you are telling them exactly the what's in it for me, why should I be doing this? Why do I need to plan my people? I already know what they're working on based on, this project plan over here or this task management system over here, or maybe I just know because it's in my email. Fine, but they need to understand the value of the resource management change that you are bringing to them, the value of any change that you are bringing to them. And you're only going to get that by telling them the what's in it for me. So overall, I think this conversation today is going to be very productive. We talk about more than just terminology and storytelling, but those were two things I really think that we needed to focus on and kind of call out, dare I say, the elephant in the room of we're all saying different words. We mean the same thing. And we need to focus on the meaning of them to move forward. All right. Enjoy the conversation with Jerry. Would love to know your thoughts after. Jerry Manis is an internationally best-selling author, speaker, and consultant who helps organizations optimize their workforce, align culture, and deliver measurable results. He works with PMO leaders, executives, and resource managers to improve visibility into who's working on what, avoid missed deadlines, and staff projects for success among shifting priorities. Jerry created the Capacity Quadrant and the service-oriented project management frameworks. And he is the author of the Resource Management and Capacity Planning Handbook, which was praised by Judith E. Glazer as the first book dedicated to what is essentially the drivetrain of organizations, the effective use of its people towards its most important activities. His work has been cited by business leaders such as Tom Peters and Orlando Magic Senior VP Pat Williams. And he has served as a registered expert with ANSI and ISO, contributing to global HR standards, including the ISO standard for workforce allocation. Jerry, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Samantha. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So that was quite the bio, which I think kind of proves it does prove that you really are an expert in this space. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. So I want to start getting into the conversation of, you have been in this space for a long time and you have seen resource management evolve alongside the project and portfolio management. So when you wrote the resource management and capacity planning handbook, what were you trying to solve? What came about?
Well, the first problem was there were no books on the topic. So I was
This
trying to
is
find
true. There aren't.
yeah. I was trying to find a resource management book. I couldn't find any, so I thought, I guess that means I have to write one.
Yeah.
So I decided to write a book. But once I got started, the biggest thing for me is I wanted to demystify resource management because there are so many
Mm.
different thoughts of it and things like that. I wanted to put, I mean, I wasn't looking to have the definitive uh, definition of everything, but I wanted to put a framework around it and raise awareness of the strategic importance of resource planning, which a lot of people really undervalue, and also to address the human side of resource management, since fundamentally it's all about people, and the term
Yeah.
resources tends to be so broadly used.
Yeah. Yeah. You actually bring up such a good point. And with my 6+ years now, specifically in this space and working with resource managers, project managers, portfolio managers, the concepts are the same, but the terms being used and the definition of those terms can be completely different organizations to organization. So in my opinion, I think that terminology sometimes gets in the way of progress and people get really hung up on those words. In your experience, why do you think that's happening?
Well, first, I completely agree. It really does get in the way. And I think people don't know where to begin. There's no agreed upon universal lexicon, so to speak.
Yeah.
We have terms like, I'll rattle off a bunch of resource management, resource planning, capacity planning, staffing, workforce planning, strategic workforce planning, then the operational workforce planning. And I was just on a team that created a standard for workforce allocation. Then you have resource allocation, of course. So, so many of these terms overlap. Many of them are interchangeable, or some of them. So as I mentioned, I was on the ISO team. We created the ISO standard for workforce allocation. That was aligned with the workforce planning standard. But
Mm.
my point is, in general, ISO uses the term workforce because it's an international team, and they claim resource has so many meanings beyond people, which is true, and that compounds the problem, I think.
Yeah. It's really funny because as someone who, the host of this podcast and also someone who creates a lot of content, whether it's written, whether it's presenting at conferences or video, I find myself, trying to focus on, okay, what terms are actually going to resonate with this audience?
Right.
Because I want to make sure I'm speaking in a way where everyone feels, one, like I know what I'm talking about because, well, I hope I do, I should say. And two, I want to make sure that they are understanding also what I'm saying as well. And I think those terms really, really get in the way. And I'm glad
Yeah.
I'm not the only one who thinks that. I'm glad you called this out in the book.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a
So,
big issue.
yeah, I agree. With that said, knowing that there are so many different terms and that is blocking, that it can be such a blocker just in the concept, what are the core concepts that leaders need to actually understand, regardless of what they're calling them?
I think regardless of what people call them, I think there's some kind of long-term staffing, let's say, and that should be, I say should be because it often is not, but it should be some kind of a collaboration between HR and, let's say, the PMO, who's, I think, in an ideal position to do this kind of thing. But this tied to strategy and tied to annual operating planning. And that's the long-term staffing. It says the people that we're hiring, that we're bringing in, are they meeting the needs, and what are the needs? So, do we have that visibility? And then there's some kind of long-range requirements, resource requirements planning. Let's say it's 3 months out. I mean, let's face it, you can't see far, much beyond that kind of a horizon. But you're saying, okay, we're going to need these kinds of resources for these projects, for this next quarter and coming in. And then there's a medium range resource planning. Let's say that's 6 weeks out or even 2 months out.
Hmm.
And then there's resource allocation, which tends to be shorter term because you don't really have visibility at that level of granularity. And then the last thing I always point out, which often gets overlooked, is the ongoing reallocation as priorities shift. And
Yes.
not haphazardly, just like oscillating, but as part of a process. So everything
Hmm.
else, I think, is variations on those themes.
Yeah. I really like how you bring it down to into kind of like, okay, what is the, dare I say, like top of the funnel with that long-term staffing and planning? And I like that you mentioned how HR and the PMO are really in a good place for that. We'll come back to that later. And you really kind of break it down into, okay, the long-term staffing and then looking at those resource requirements months in advance. And then also, okay, what's coming up? And, the allocation for the shorter. And yes, I think the point as well that a lot of people forget is there is a management piece to resource management, if that's what you choose to call it, or workforce management, which is, the things that we have planned, that we looked at 4 weeks, 6 weeks in advance, 2 months, whatever. Is that actually happening? And if it's not, we need to be adjusting in real time and making sure that what is going on is reflective of, our data is also aligning with that. I think that's
Right.
really important.
Sometimes I use there's a video game years ago. Remember the days of the Wii? My daughter would play the Wii, and they had a Wii soccer, and they would throw soccer
Yes.
balls at you and would try to move your head to bounce the ball back. And then every once in a while, they would start throwing things like irons and things like that, and it would clonk you in the head. It would make this sound. And I'd be laughing so hard, I'd be rolling on the floor. But sometimes it feels like you're taking on projects and you're overloaded. It feels like you're just dodging the irons. So,
Yeah. That is a really good analogy. And honestly, I haven't thought about a Wii in a while, but I
me neither.
remember that game.
Yeah, yeah.
I
My,
remember
my
that
daughter
game.
totaled a TV that way, but that's another
Oh
story.
my gosh. I've had brothers who have totaled TVs with Xboxes before, and I feel like your daughter is probably a little bit more just, the Wii was a little bit more challenging when it comes to bodily movements. So,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, so getting back on track here. You've mentioned before that historically leaders just couldn't get that bird's eye view. So exactly the example of that long-term staffing and, that higher level picture of everything that's going on. What kind of visibility are organizations missing, and what decisions cannot be made because of that visibility or lack of it?
Well, I think that's a great question because the problem is um, organizations, what I see a lot is they plan to, what we used to call manufacturing, planning to infinite capacity. You see that a lot in the MRP side of things. So they would plan to infinite capacity, making pretend they have all the resources they need. And then they open the floodgates and then they're surprised when people are overloaded. Or maybe the flip side, they don't take on a project that they could have because they're not sure who's available in the organization to deliver it. They don't have that visibility. So I use a checkbook analogy. Let's say you need to buy a car and you have a checkbook with you, but you have no idea what's in your account and you need a down payment. Well, there's two kinds of people. There's people that are say, "Oh, I'm feeling good today. I'm going to write it," and then that check may bounce. Or there's a person that says, "We better not get it because I'm not sure what's in our account." Maybe they could have afforded that car. So it's the same thing. If you don't have visibility into your resources, into your supply, you're not going to know what to do, the right decisions to make about the demand. So the solution, I think, is during project intake, people tend to assess spend and say, okay, can we afford to take this on? I think they also need to assess capacity. And then instead of saying, okay, the project's approved, let's go, schedule the start date based on capacity and priority. And I think that's something that's missing. And then last, during portfolio reviews, when you're reviewing, let's say it's every couple weeks or once a month, and you're having a review of your top 10 projects and things that are above the line and so on, you need the visibility to be able to make those reallocation decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because I think that is one of the biggest things when I speak with people, especially at conferences too. Everyone wants to know where to get started, where to get started. And I'm like, one, you need to know how much capacity you have. What roles do you have? Potentially what skills, if you're mature enough to go down that route, because otherwise you're planning with a blank check that you don't know if it's going to bounce or not. And I think
Right.
that's one of the biggest things that's important is understanding what you have today. And then, yes, the project intake. It's not enough just to look at the money. You also need to look at the people you have and the scheduling of when can those projects start. We want everything to start on January 1st or whatever the first of the year is for the organization, of course, but that's not feasible. And then you're going to drag things out and then you're spending more money. And I think I really like that checkbook analogy. I think that that's a
Yeah, yeah.
great one
And
to
and
help
that's where you
explain
need the
this.
purpose-built software. I mean, you're not going to get there on spreadsheets. It's just,
Yes.
it's an uphill battle.
Yeah. It really is. We are familiar with the spreadsheet battle over here. That's
Yeah,
for
I'm
sure.
sure.
Okay, so let's kind of switch now and talk about the capacity quadrant framework that you created. What led you to create this, and what gap did you see in how organizations were thinking about their maturity in this area?
Well, I think, when I was putting together the resource management and capacity planning handbook, it's a mouthful. I didn't pick the title, the publisher did, but when I was, it's resource management is a complex topic, but it can be simplified. And my idea was to put together a simple framework to grasp all the moving parts. And so an organization can use that to assess maturity and see where they are, and then to know, which areas do we have covered. So for instance, I look at it as a balanced scorecard of four
Hmm.
elements. And one is visibility. And that means, visibility of supply and demand and the variables that impact supply. The next is prioritization. And that includes, strategic alignment and ranking and categorization, all that stuff. So the idea is once you have that visibility and you know which work is most important, you have then the groundwork to build upon. And then you can move on to the third area, which is optimization. And that's you're optimizing the people in terms of productivity, and you're optimizing the portfolio in terms of value and so on. But you don't want to optimize until you have the visibility and you know which work is most important. And then the fourth area I had historically called it in the book, I called it integration. I've been, lately I've been calling it alignment, but I don't mean strategic alignment per se. I mean aligning the organization and integrating with HR and with finance and things like that. That's the last perspective, and that's kind of the glue that holds it all together. So without something like that, without a framework, I think maturity can be haphazard. And the one last thing I'll mention is a framework like the capacity quadrant, and you're looking at the prioritization and the visibility and so on. It works across project, portfolio, and resource management holistically. So I think that was a roadblock too for people. They were looking at these things in silos.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's honestly, I'm glad you bring that up. And I think you explained the four areas of the quadrant really well. I think, having the alignment piece of it, and again, like you said, it's more about organizational alignment, not strategic alignment. You're right. We see this all the time where that data is completely siloed because everyone is thinking that it's different audiences or different organizations, departments within the company that need this information. And sure, yes, to a point, but at the same time, absolutely not. You can't have a project deliver on time, successfully deliver what you want it to if you don't have the people to do it. And at the same time, you can't have a portfolio that completes when it should be on budget with the ROI if your projects are getting delayed, if those
Absolutely.
deliverables aren't making it through. So, and at the same time, like, you have to look at that portfolio level to know who you have and to drive your workforce. And I think I'm hoping the industry is moving towards a more aligned thinking about how this impacts the entire organization rather than just thinking in those silos. Because
Exactly.
I think we will see a lot more organizations be more successful.
I agree.
Okay, so I'm really curious to know your hands-on experience with this. So when you look at where an organization falls on the quadrant today, what patterns or similarities are you seeing between a low maturity organization and then a high maturity organization?
Well, I've seen a number of patterns, and I also participated in a couple benchmark studies that were run by Appleseed Partners, where they surveyed some 600 PMO leaders and executives around their issues with resource planning and other topics. And consistently, and I have a tag cloud that kind of goes over what some of the big issues are. The pain points in lower maturity organizations consistently were things like resource overcommitment and
Yeah.
lack of visibility, which we talked about, is they couldn't tell who was doing what and if it was important work and so on. People were in reaction mode, overworked, and by and large, the PMO tended to have a narrow focus, usually on projects. So they
Yes.
tended to be viewed as the project police. And then consistently, the higher maturity respondents were more planful. They made more informed decisions. The PMOs were placed more strategically. And and they had the visibility to make, like I said, to make those informed decisions.
Yeah. W- uh, Curious to know, have you ever seen, or do you have, some type of case study where you've seen an organization, a PMO specifically, go from the project police to, adopting kind of like that more strategic, more, we're going to plan ahead of time, maturity level? Just curious to see what you've seen there.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen a few organizations, really repurpose their PMO. I've seen them rename the PMO because, they wanted to try to get away from the stigma. Some call it a strategic integration office, and so yeah, I've seen all kinds of names. There was whole discussions around that. But but by and large, I think the thing that they needed to focus on were the goals. I had a client in San Diego, a healthcare network, and they had a number of PMOs in different areas, and they're all replicating work, and they wanted to bring together an enterprise PMO. And I try
Hmm.
to get them thinking more about the goals. What is it you're trying to accomplish, and which things that these various distributed PMOs could do. And so they were placing it more strategically. I said, you need to bring the level up, and project excellence. There's a lot of ways to deliver that, but
Yeah.
I think being able to move more, to operate more strategically, and they were much more successful. They started becoming more goal oriented. They started being able to make more decisions. So I think I've seen it consistently work.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's good news over here. And I think it's funny too, when we were talking about terms and concepts being the same,
Mhm.
people, organizations renaming their PMO to get away from that stigma. And then now you have across organizations, the PMO is, is it value stream management office? Is it,
Yeah,
more around programs? Is it more around exactly what you just said with like the strategic alignment area? It just kind of goes back to those terms being, we're kind of doing the same thing, but we're going to call it something different.
right. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to focus on, why is it so easy for an organization to deprioritize resource management, resource planning, the forecasting, whatever you want to call it, when we all agree that it's important. Everyone knows that they should be doing it, or, at least someone within the organization does. And a lot of times, people are just too busy. I don't want to take on yet another thing. I don't, we're not set up to be successful in this way. And there's a lot of resistance there. So why do you think it's so easy to deprioritize within an organization?
I think it's like people who know they have something wrong with their health, but they're afraid to go to the doctor or something. Usually, usually what I find is it means that they're overly focused on the day-to-day chaos, or focused on activities as opposed to outcomes, and as opposed to goals. And they're focused more on delivery than on the capability to deliver. So they need
Mm,
to keep asking why, and why aren't we delivering this? And really focusing on improving their capabilities. And like you said earlier, you can have the best execution of a project, but if you don't have the right people at the right time, it's not going to bring the value it's supposed to bring.
yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. We another episode that we have, we spoke with a gentleman who had in his entire career had been in like a PMO space, and the last 10 years he really focused on, okay, resource management is hard, it's going to be difficult, we're going to resist it, but it's going to help us grow, and grow they have. And I think that that's just a true testament to like you said, we have something wrong with our health. We don't want to go to the doctor because we think that's going to, make it go away. It
Yeah,
doesn't. And, imagine that. We feel better once we actually did the work and did what we have to do. So,
yeah. And I see a lot of resource managers that say, they say, oh, well, we're too busy. We don't have time to get involved in that kind of stuff. And what they don't
yeah,
realize is if the problem was corrected, they wouldn't be quite as busy, or they'd be busy, but doing more strategic things
yeah, yeah.
instead of
That's,
firefighting.
yeah. Well, and I think too, like firefighting, it, can be exciting sometimes, but it gets old
Yeah,
after a while. And
right.
how can you, instead of being measured on how many fires have you put out, what if you could be measured on how many value how much value did I deliver? Did my team deliver? Did, whatever that is. And I think, what would you rather go, to your CEO, let's say, and say, this is exactly what we did this year, and this is all the value. Like everyone wants to do that. Like we want to feel as if we are really leaning in and providing something to the organization.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I want to go back to your comment about the project police and how a classic PMO, let's call it, is seen as a project police, methodology police, where the terms are super important. But we know, as you've said, the real value is going to be more on that strategic side. So curious, what does a strategically mature PMO actually look like then?
Well, I've implemented a number of PMOs and I've consulted on a number of PMOs, and consistently I try to focus on four key areas. And you probably heard this a gazillion times, but now it'll be gazillion and one. Um, but with project management, we talk about doing things right, and portfolio management, doing the right things. And so I see a lot of PMOs focus on it. Traditionally, like you said, it was project management. Luckily, I'm starting to see more and more of them expand that to portfolio management and thinking more strategically. But there's two other areas I always include in the mix. Um, Resource management, which is near and dear to our heart, and that's doing the right things with the right people at the right time. And then benefits realization often gets overlooked. And that's, to me, it's all about setting goals and measuring value. And I think a really strategically mature PMO thinks in terms of those four areas and how they integrate together. And, one without the other is not, is going to have problems.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a really good point. You can't, it's like we're all, I don't know, going back to the checkbook analogy in a car, like, the wheels of the car, they are going to be all about motion and moving. The gas
Right.
pedal is all going to be about, getting those wheels to move and different things. And it's, yes, we're focused on specific things because that's what, the PM versus the resource management, all of that stuff. But when it all comes together, then you get this amazing car that does, gets you from point A to point B consistently and all of those things that you want out of a vehicle like that. I think that's a really good thought of, all of these things can be true at the same time. And when you bring
Yeah.
them together, they're going to make you even more powerful.
It's like the comedian Sid Caesar said. He goes, the guy who invented the wheel, speaking of cars, he said he was an idiot, but the guy who invented the other three, he was a genius. So,
That is hilarious. I've never heard that before. That's a
yeah.
good one. So I think we definitely both agree that the PMO is really the right place to lead the alignment, as you said, between strategy, portfolio, and resources. What would be your argument for that? Why do you think that is true?
Well, I think they've already been focused, like we said, on project management, and to a degree these days more and more in portfolio management. So by default, they have a sense of what's going on in the organization. So that kind of puts them in a critical position of strategic enabler in terms of driving organizational focus. But with added attention to resource management, because let's face it, it's all about people
Hmm.
and the benefits realization, and which is all about value. To also drive productivity and value. And I think it really, especially with all four of those, barrels going, I think it puts them in a unique position that are, they're at the center of things, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a kind of a good segue into the conversation between productivity and value, we'll say. So a lot of organizations are focused on the productivity. Are we getting the most out of the people that we have? But they're not looking at it from the people standpoint. They're looking at it more from the work standpoint. So when why is that, more value driven, that alignment, if you will, why is that the more critical piece when productivity is also important? But why would you say that's kind of the way to lean?
Well, I like that you mentioned because they're both important, and that's true. But you can be as productive as anybody, but if you're not working on the right things, or if you're not delivering value, then it's not. Is it really productivity? So I often refer to two lines from songs. One was from an Alanis Morissette song called "Mary Jane," where she said, "It's full speed, baby, in the wrong direction." And I always thought that was a great line. And then John Lennon had a line that said, "How can I go forward when I don't know which way I'm facing?" And I think those two kind of speak to it. So yeah, productivity is important. That includes the human aspect, but
Hmm.
alignment and allocation make sure that that productivity is focused in the right place. And then it's kind of a paradox, but that makes people more productive. If it's focused in the wrong place,
Yes.
because their energy isn't diluted or scattered. So I think alignment and allocation are also connected. There was a Harvard Business Review video, and I've blogged about this. Um, it was called Why Strategy Execution Unravels and What to Do About It. And it cites three areas that it felt were cornerstones of successful strategic execution. And I was delighted to see that it was alignment, reallocation. They're talking about continuous reallocation, and business agility, which is coordinating across a business. So I think that fits all right in with what we're talking about. And I'll throw one more quote. Thomas Edison said, "Strategy without execution is hallucination." And I think it speaks to the importance of both of them together.
Oh my gosh. I want to put that in my email signature. Like, just so everyone knows where I'm coming from, everyone knows what I'm about to say. I used to working with so many resource managers and PMOs, honestly, across the world at this point in the last 6 years, I have learned to kind of come about with those more bold statements of strategy without execution is just a hope, without strategy, without your resource plan is just a hope. And I've, gotten a lot more comfortable to come to organizations saying that. And I think that's such a good, you can make the best plan, but if you don't have the people to do it, what's the point? And that really drives that productivity part of it of,
Right.
I can, I think I might be productive on something, but if it's the wrong thing, I just wasted my time. I wasted the company's time. I'm now feeling, deflated and defeated. And then, how's that going to carry over into other things? And it really is just like a slippery slope at that point.
Absolutely. And, in business, personal life, whatever, you can find yourself, really busy, but you think, oh, what did I actually accomplish?
Yes. Yes. And you know what? Sometimes in my personal life, that thought is happening all the time.
Yeah. Me too.
Okay. So, before we kind of dive into what you're thinking of next, I want to call out, you also write fiction, and you also talk about, that storytelling and how that is important for, leaders throughout an organization. So how would you say that storytelling helps leaders communicate those complex ideas, those processes that we want to put in place, like capacity and constraints and trade-offs because of it? How would you say that storytelling would help them do that?
Well, I think the best way to communicate any complex idea is through story, which Steve Jobs did all the time. But Chip and Dan Heath wrote a book called Made to Stick. And I always loved that book. It stuck, needless to say. But one of the central acronyms they had in there was called SUCCESS. And SUCCESS stood for simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional story. And to this day, I remember that. I memorized it. Of course, they lopped off the last S, but that's besides the point. But the idea is, if ideas that stick, as opposed to ones that don't, are simply because somebody told a simple, unexpected. If you say the same thing everybody else, it's not going to stick. But if you say something different, like Seth Godin's Purple Cow or whatever, it's going to stick. But it should be concrete, not abstract. And it needs to be credible, whether it's backed up with facts or coming from a credible source or whatever. And if you can make it emotional, all the better. So, for instance, let's say, there's no way you're going to make, people be emotional about entering time, for instance, but
Yeah.
but if you talk about a time when your organization couldn't complete an important project because maybe the people weren't available, and you can emphasize the fallout from that, or what happened, or a time when people were overloaded and it led to burnout or missing deadlines, or maybe if you don't have a story like that, tell a contrasting story of an organization that did those things and undertook resource planning and did it the right way and what they were able to achieve. But to get people on board, they tend to remember stories. Eli Goldratt wrote a book called The Goal. And the whole book was a story, and it was meant to teach a theory of constraints. It was a pretty complex topic. Or you look at Who Moved My Cheese, about change. So stories tend to move people, and they tend to resonate. In fact, I offer a whole workshop on my website called Storytelling for Leaders. And by the way, this is not a promo or anything, but I have a free
Should
white
be.
paper.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, but I have a free white paper called, with no firewall. You don't have to enter your name or anything. Called "The Power of Story and Leadership." If it's something people are interested in learning more about, how does story apply in organizations.
Yeah. If you're okay with it, I would love to link that out in the show notes. That way people can go
Sure.
right to it. That sounds, have a free resource like that. That sounds so helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when I talk to organizations who, maybe they're just starting a more formal PMO, or maybe they are trying to bring all their project managers into that like enterprise, overseeing a little bit, overseeing, the project managers are just coming together regardless of what, departments that they work in. I'm often asked, how can we get people um, to jump on this, to understand the importance of it, to really come together. And that's what I start with is you need to give every team or every person who has a stake in this, you need to tell them exactly what they're going to get out of it. And then more importantly, you need to show them. And I think that's where that storytelling comes into place when, you need to show them, hey, you're constantly having this issue, whether it's delivery, whether it's going over budget. If you were doing it this way, in fact, here is proof of it. This is what you would be able
Absolutely.
to achieve. And so I think that storytelling piece, you're right. You're right on the money with that one.
Yeah, and that's what's often missing is that proof. People, they want to say, what's in it for me, or how's my life going to change? I mean, that's ultimately what people care about. And maybe their life won't change, but they're being asked to help because the organization can benefit from it. And then, everybody loves to help if they're being asked to help. So instead of saying, okay, this is going to help you, and then they realize it's not, you're better off saying, hey, we need your help in making this happen, and here's what we can achieve.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. Okay. So if you could give PMO and portfolio leaders one mindset shift, so one thing that they can kind of move towards today, what would that be?
I think, again, thinking more in terms of outcomes and value and encouraging the organization to do that, because the PMO, I think, has an opportunity to be a change driver.
Hmm.
I'm like a box of quotes, but I always
I
use
love it.
I always use Albert Einstein's quote because I just love it. He said, confusion of goals and perfection of means seems, in my opinion, to characterize our age. And in my opinion, it also characterizes way too many PMOs. And so I'd say, sure, offer guidelines and toolboxes for project managers, and then they can form their own communities of practice to improve. But the PMO should otherwise be focused on helping the organization reach its goals by aligning the organization, maximizing and allocating the talent in the organization accordingly. And notice I said talent because the last thing, and maybe the overarching thing, is to remember that project management, resource management, portfolio management, it's really all about people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that really brings us back to that first point, or one of the first points of, that longer term planning needs to include HR. And like you said, the PMO is really just prime for that. And so I think with that mindset shift that, it's not just about, projects, but aligning the organization and maximizing the talent that you have. It,
Right.
it just comes back to PMO leaders. We need to be working with HR.
Absolutely. I
And
think it's a big missing link.
I completely agree. That's probably a whole other episode of how we can do that, and we'll come back to that. But
Yeah, yeah.
I think
That's
that
why I was
that is an
glad to
important
see
thing
it
too.
as an ISO standard that fell within the HR community. I was
Yeah,
delighted to see that.
yeah, yeah. Yes, I agree. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I do thank you for the conversation today. It's been great.
Uh,
So I like to end each episode with a simple question. I think it's simple. What's the plan? What is your plan for the future?
Well, the immediate plan is one thing I'm excited to share is there's a book called Project Land Goes to the Movies, and
Hmm.
it's now available for pre-order on Amazon. The official release date is January 20th, and it'll be
Okay.
out everywhere. What that is we gathered, when I say we, my colleague and good friend Dawn Mahan and myself were co-editors of this book, and she coined the term Project Land to describe the world of projects, and she wrote a book called Meet the Players in Project Land. But with
Hmm.
this, we decided we were going to gather 22 project management authors and subject matter experts, basically a who's who in project management, to each write a chapter about lessons from their favorite movies. Because, we all love lessons from movies. And surprisingly, it ended up spanning 17 genres. So it should be a
Wow.
fun read. So I'm hoping people will like it. And lastly, I have a few self-led training programs and live master classes for the capacity quadrant and the one called storytelling for leaders and some other programs. So that's all available at my website at jerrymanis.com if people are interested.
Awesome. And you know what? I would love to link to both of those. So we'll put a link to Project Land Goes to the Movies. That sounds incredibly interesting. And then we'll also put a link to the masterclass that you're putting together. That's awesome. That's so exciting.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Jerry, thank you so much for your time today. This was a fantastic conversation. I am so happy that we were able to get you on the podcast. And who knows, maybe we'll be diving into the HR side of things here soon, because I think that that's going to be kind of the next step of all of this. So thank you so much.
That'd be a lot of fun. This is great.
Thanks for listening to What's the Plan, hosted by me, Samantha Varner, and produced by Kyle Wirtz. This podcast is brought to you by ProSymmetry. If you have questions, episode suggestions, or just want to say hi, we'd love to hear from you. Email us anytime at whatstheplanpod@prosymmetry.com. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.